Good evening, Rowan. It's the 6th of December 2015 and it's about 8:30 and I'm making you my usual Sunday evening video to reassure you that once again I haven't been seducing any priests over the weekend, so you can relax. Anyway, I'm going to make some more comments about your blockbuster of a lecture at the British Academy, which I so wish I'd been present at. I should have gone to that one. That should have been the one I went to. It was just so unbelievable. Anyway, I'm going to finish off commenting on specific things that you said in that lecture this evening, although I am going to make a further video to make some further comments about you. Anyway, here's the quotation. Unless we think of resolution as something capable of unmaking the past, that's a much more serious attempt to exit from the world of narrative, then we have to think of it as a moment, this reconciliation, this resolution, a moment in which the strands of past narrative are so entwined as to mark a possible new stage in the story, not an absolute ending which obliterates the cost of what has gone before. So this is quite interesting that you refer to resolution as being the same thing as reconciliation. So I'm wondering what you mean by reconciliation there, because do you think you're going to be reconciled with me? In a sense that I'm going to want to be friends with you, is that what you think? Because that is never ever going to happen. And if you think I'm ever going to think you're anything more than a scumbag and a crap merchant, you really are delusional. Well, you're delusional anyway. You have narcissistic delusions. I am competent to assess mental health, by the way. It was part of my job. Everybody thinks that only psychiatrists do it, but it isn't true. They actually do very little of it. And a large part of my job was conducting assessments on people. And you certainly have narcissistic delusions. And they're not psychotic delusions, they're not transient or in response to stress or drug abuse or anything like that. It's a feature of your personality, narcissistic delusions. Anyway, this is the absolute quotation of all quotations. I love it, you see, because I say something about you like bombastic self-justification and sophistry, and I say that you have sexual fantasies about young women, and then you go around spreading those fantasies behind their backs as if they were facts, and then you go and do it about St. Teresa of Avila and prove that I was right. Every time I say anything about you, you then go and do something and prove that I'm right. It's just fantastic. So please keep up the good work. Anyway, all you ever do is try and squirm out of it. I've said that. You just wriggle and squirm and you'll do anything to get out of it rather than admit that you're just wrong. You're just plain wrong and you're plain wicked. And you're never going to admit this because of your narcissistic delusions. And also, you think it wouldn't be politically advantageous to you at the present moment, which is why you won't do it. The only reason you've even started edging in that direction is because you think that might manipulate me. Well, it won't. I don't do psychopaths. I'm not being manipulated. You picked the wrong person, boyo. You really did. Anyway, a man in the audience asks a question at the end. I'm going to try and edit this clip into the video because it's so fantastic. It's just unbelievably fantastic. And the looks on the faces of the audience are a picture as well. Anyway, this is the question the man asked. What is the place of sin, human sin, in tragedy, Bearing in mind, in the beginning, in Genesis chapter 1, everything was good. But when the sin came in, everything went upside down. And I'm not just really comfortable talking about tragedy in a contemporary society without looking at the effects of sin. And this is what you say. I've abbreviated it slightly but not misrepresented it. I think there are two things to be said in relation to the question of sin. Now I'm going to comment now. You say two things about it. There's actually the third thing that you miss out, and I'm going to put that in at the end. So here's the first thing that you say. Don't look for one-to-one correlations between sin and suffering, because you won't find that calculus. Suffering is not proportionate to guilt in the world we know, and that's crucially important. Well, you're talking there, aren't you, about the guilt of the person who's suffering. Suffering isn't proportionate to guilt in the person who's suffering. It may be proportionate to the guilt of the person who's inflicting the suffering, like you. You don't mention that. Anyway, here's the second point that you make. Second, if we're in a world where our desires are always running in, let's just kindly say, eccentric directions, then the actual outcome of even the most well-intentioned action may be marked by sin. We create the effect of sin, even if our intentions are not sinful. It's that deep entanglement of our motives at levels we don't understand, the springs of our action, that illustrates the world, the theological world, in which we can talk about the tragic, because it's a world in which, in one sense, our desires are ignorant, are blinded to some degree. And that's where the video of the lecture ends. So, you're still maintaining your innocence, aren't you, Rowan? It's just that, oh, there's such a deep entanglement of motives. It's not that your motives are to crush and destroy anybody who threatens you, and to promote people who are incompetent, to serve your own interests and to serve your political agenda. Oh no, you're just a pure little innocent snowflake. And it's all this entanglement of eccentric desires that just cause all the disaster and devastation everywhere you go. It's nothing to do with you being an evil scumbag, is it? Nice try. You're just unbelievable. So there are the 2 points that you make. The man's asked a question, you know, about sin coming into the world, and he's not comfortable talking about tragedy without looking at the effects of sin. So you make these 2 points. 1, sin isn't and suffering are not proportionate. Guilt and suffering are not proportionate in the person who's suffering. Your second point, that even if someone has a good intention, then there might be a bad outcome. And the third point, which you didn't make, that I'm making, the thing that you left out, the thing that you always leave out, which is what I've said before, is about virtue and moral values. So you, Rowan, act in an immoral way. You lack virtue, and as a result of this, a great deal of devastation and suffering is left in your wake. So I said that you engage in bombastic self-justification, which is also evident in this lecture, with all you're squirming around talking about pure motives having sin-laden outcomes, which I mentioned in the previous video. So you're doing that, bombastic self-justification. Sophistry, which is making spurious arguments, which is what I said you did as well, and you're also doing this in the same manner that I've just mentioned. And I also said that you evaded all mention of moral values and virtue, and you've done this again, haven't you? This is the pattern in your behaviour. You behave in an immoral way, you behave in a wicked way, and you leave this trail of destruction and devastation and ruined lives and suicides behind you. And you never refer to it, you never refer to the importance of moral values or developing virtue in order, that we may live in peace and harmony, and the likelihood of people's lives being devastated by the wickedness of individuals like you would be vastly reduced. So I'm saying it to you once again, Rowan, this is a massive issue for you. It's what you always evade. It's a consistent pattern in your behaviour. You never deviate from it. This is the issue you need to be addressing, rather than talking crap, which is what you usually do. You've just done the same thing over again, and once again you've proved my assessment of you right. I am competent to assess mental health. It was part of my job. And you are delusional. And it's not a psychotic delusion, which would imply some transience to it, that it would only emerge under stress or as a result of drug abuse or something like that. It's not a psychotic delusion, it's a feature of your personality, narcissistic delusions. Anyway, I'm going to try and edit this clip of this question into the video. So we'll see how that works out, because I haven't tried to do that before on YouTube. But I do know where you're going to be this week, Rowan. So don't forget to be alert.
What is the place of sin, human sin, in tragedy? Bear in mind, in the beginning, in Genesis chapter 1, everything was good. But when the sin came in, everything went upside down. And I'm not just really comfortable talking about tragedy in a contemporary society without looking at the effects of sin.
Thank you very much. Is this... Yes. Thank you very much for a very important question. I think there are two things to be said in relation to the question of sin. The first is that the Christian worldview, and to some extent, of course, the worldview of Job, says don't look for one-to-one correlations between sin and suffering, because you won't find that calculus. Suffering is not proportionate to guilt in the world we know, and that's crucially important. Second thing is the dimension of the moral life which Donald McKinnon draws out, which is that if we are in, I think I said, in a world where our desires are always running in, let's just kindly say, eccentric directions, then the actual outcome of even the most well-intentioned action may be marked by sin. We can create the effect of sin, even if our intentions are not sinful. And it's that deep entanglement of our motives at levels we don't understand, the springs of our action, that illustrates the world, the theological world, in which we can talk about the tragic, because it's a world in which, in some sense, our desires are ignorant, are blinded in some degree.
I'm going to read this letter out now, as I promised the other day, that was written by you, but signed by other people, which had me thrown out of St Michael's Church a month after you'd had me sacked from everything for complaining about a disgusting pervert member of clergy, the Reverend Dr. David Peat. And I complained about him sexually harassing me, masturbating in front of me, and trying to coerce me into having sex with him. And without any investigation, a week after I handed this letter over, you had me sacked from everything I did in the parish. And because that didn't make me capitulate, a month later you had me thrown out of the church altogether. So you had me sacked from everything on the 22nd of May I beg your pardon, the 22nd of April 2004, and you had me thrown out of the church on the 23rd of May 2004 because I hadn't capitulated in response to your deliberately abusive behaviour. So here's the letter that I was given on the 23rd of May. Dear Rebecca, we write concerning your attendance at the Ascension Day Parish Communion at St Michael's on the evening of May the 20th. This also follows previous correspondence about your unfounded accusations concerning the Reverend Dr. David Peat. Well, since there was no investigation, how would anyone know whether my accusations were unfounded or not? They wouldn't, would they? Because there was no investigation. So the letter goes on. The Reverend Kevin Ward. This should be the Reverend Dr. Kevin Ward, by the way. It's funny we have the Reverend Dr. David Peat, who isn't a theologian. But we don't have the Reverend Dr. Kevin Ward, who is a theologian and was a lecturer in the University of Leeds Theology Department. So the Reverend Dr. David Peat doesn't even have a degree in theology, but the Reverend Kevin Ward is actually an academic theologian and was teaching theology at the time in the University of Leeds. So the Reverend Kevin Ward and the Reverend Michael Cross conducted the service. You arrived and sat in your usual place at the back on the left. Well, this wasn't while the Reverend Kevin Ward and the Reverend Michael Cross were conducting the service. It was a long time before the service began when I arrived, and there was no one else in the church apart from my friend who was the verger, and he was in the vestry. So I was in the church building on my own, in my usual place at the back left, when David Peat arrived, and he didn't go and sit down anywhere or go into the vestry. He stood at the back on the left, hanging around me. So this is what the letter says. You arrived and sat in your usual place at the back on the left. Dr. Peat then arrived to attend as a member of the congregation and sat a few rows in front of you. That isn't true. He didn't sit down. He hung around me when I was in the church on my own. You quickly left the church. What a surprise. You returned again after the service had begun, looking angry. And you went straight across to sit at the front on the right. That's right, I didn't sit in my usual place at the back on the left, because after I had left the church quickly because of David Peat hanging around me, he'd actually gone and sat in the same row that he knew I always sat in and that I'd been sitting in before he entered the church, and I'd left my books there, so he knew I was intending to go back there, and he went and sat in the same row. This is a man I accused of sexually harassing me, and in order to prove he wasn't sexually harassing me, he came into the church, hung around me, and then after I left the church, went and sat where I always sit, thinking I'd be so cowed by being sacked from everything the month before that I wouldn't dare go and sit anywhere else, that I'd go and sit next to him and be so polite to him. That was the intention. So here I am going and sitting at the front on the right. You did not turn round during the reading of the Gospel. Well, in Anglican churches, it's customary, in a lot of them at least, to bring out the book with the gospel in, up the aisle, to read the gospel from up the aisle, and then the people who are sitting in front of that will turn round and face the gospel. Well, I didn't turn round because I was sitting at the front on the right, and David Pete was sitting at the back on the left, in my usual place. And if I'd turned round, I would have been looking directly at him. However, not turning round during the gospel isn't a sin, and it's no big deal. It's no big deal at all. It's absolutely irrelevant. You did not turn round during the reading of the gospel, and you did not turn round to exchange the peace. Well, it's customary for the priest to say during the Eucharist, the peace of the Lord be always with you, and then invite everyone to share a sign of peace, and then people shake hands with the people around them and say peace be with you, or something like that. Well, the people who came up to me, who were sitting around me, I shook hands with them. I didn't turn round because I didn't want to look at David Pete, because he was always staring at me, because he's a disgusting pervert, and he got off on it as well, because he's a psychopath just like you. So I didn't want to look at him, especially since he was sitting in my seat. So that's why I didn't turn round. But again, it was no big deal. I didn't make any big issue out of it. I shook hands with the people around me, and that was that. You then hurried out of the church immediately after receiving communion. This behaviour, which you must be aware is not proper at parish communion, was clearly related to the presence of Dr. Pete. Oh yes, the presence of Dr. Pete, who deliberately sat where I always sit. He sat there, and that was clearly related to the fact that I always sit there. Isn't that strange? Not proper at parish communion? What kind of bollocks is that? It's complete and utter bollocks. You wrote this letter, Rowan, and the brain-dead half-wits who gave it to me, they haven't got a brain cell between them. What a bunch of weak, pathetic, brain-dead, brainwashed morons. A number of the congregation and choir noticed how you acted. No, what they noticed was David Pete was sitting in my flaming seat, and they found it highly disturbing. So they didn't find it highly disturbing then that a man who I'd accused of sexually harassing me and masturbating in front of me and trying to coerce me into having sex with him had gone and sat in my seat to try and force me to involve myself with him yet again. We regard such behaviour as unacceptable and inappropriate. Well, I totally agree. I totally agree. Sexual harassment, masturbation in front of other people who are not consenting to that, and trying to coerce someone into sex, particularly when you're supposed to have a pastoral responsibility towards them, this behaviour is unacceptable and inappropriate. Particularly in view of your previous undertaking not to disturb worship at St Michael's or to make any further gestures towards David Pete. Well, I never undertook not to make any gestures towards David Pete, but I didn't make any gestures towards him, I just didn't look at him. And he liked to be the centre of attention, and he completely collapsed if the attention was ever taken away from him. I mean, even if it was someone else officiating at the service and he wasn't, he just couldn't handle it. He's a bigger prima donna than you, and that's saying something. Dr. Pete will be taking services more often in future, and he is likely to be present in the church at any time. So he's declaring his intention to harass me, in other words. It is disturbing to worship for both congregation and clergy if there is a possibility of your presence and of the unpleasant atmosphere that such improper behaviour invokes. Oh yes, it's such an unpleasant atmosphere, isn't it? Trying to avoid a disgusting pervert who's trying to screw you. What an unpleasant atmosphere. As church wardens, we are responsible for order in the church. But we're not going to do anything about the disgusting pervert who's been sexually harassing you, preaching satanic filth, and who tried to screw you and wanked himself off in front of you. We're responsible for the church, but we're going to shit on you because we find it more convenient. In fact, when they gave me this letter, one of the church wardens said, "He's threatening to take you to court, and us." So I had to go, you see, to save everyone else's skin. I've lost my place now. We consider that it would be appropriate for you to completely discontinue your attendance at St Michael's for any services or for any other purpose. Well, I did completely discontinue my attendance at St Michael's for any services or for any other purpose. I have never set foot in the building again. I will never set foot in the building again. You wanted me to go back there and grovel to David Pete, and I know that you did, because of a speech you made at the Greenbelt Festival not long afterwards, where you said, "Oh, you have to go and see the priest and sort it all out." There are a number of other Anglican churches in the area which you could choose to attend. Well, I didn't even live in that area by then, so I never went to any other Anglican churches in the area. And if I'd had any sense, I would have never gone to another Anglican church again. But as it is, I did remain in the Anglican church for about 2.5 further years, when the last straw was Freemasons being invited to attend a morning service, and this being trumpeted on the weekly bulletin and as if it was an amazing thing. And that was quite frankly the last straw. I'd had enough, and that's what made me leave altogether. So that was the end of my Anglican career, so to speak. And I'll tell you something else. I know why you're so desperate to get me back in the Church of England, because you were going round telling everyone, "Oh, she's so desperate to be a priest, she'll do anything, you know, she'll offer sex to people, blah, blah, blah." Who were all these people I was supposed to be offering sex to? I haven't got the faintest idea, but I'm sure you've never found any of them because it never happened. But you can hardly argue that if I'm a Catholic, can you? Because there aren't any women priests in the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church doesn't have women priests. So, if I'm a Catholic, you can hardly argue that I'm so desperate to be a priest that I'll do anything, can you? And that's why you're desperate to get me out of the Catholic Church. You think I was born yesterday. We also ask you to resign forthwith from the Parochial Church Council. We enclose a draft letter of resignation for you to sign. So, they're pretending this came from the church wardens. The last one they were pretending came from the vicar. Both of them came from you, Rowan Williams. I knew it wasn't coming from these people, but they're such a bunch of pathetic, brain-dead drips. They're quite prepared to put riff-raff like me through anything because they're lacking in moral fibre. They've got no balls, just like you. No balls. Pathetic, weak, immature, overprivileged idiots. They'll go along with anything to save their skin, and they don't care who gets destroyed in the process. And you know what, Rowan? When you tried to get your leg over, it wouldn't have done any good if I'd responded positively, would it? Because you've got absolutely no balls at all. You're a big bully. You're a pathetic little playground bully, and it only takes one little poof to blow you out. If you think I'm ever letting this go, you disgusting, dirty bastard, you're very much mistaken. You think I'm ever letting this go? You're insane. And let me tell you something else as well. I spoke about how when you blow on an ember to try and put it out, the only thing you achieve is you make it shine even more brilliantly. Now let me tell you what you've just done with all your scheming and squirming and in this bizarre lecture where you're making out that you've got pure motives and it was just because of the sinful world that it all went bad. You've poured petrol on the ember. I am so furious that you dare to patronise me like this, you arrogant little prick. You think I'm ever letting this go or backing down in the face of satanic filth like you? You've lost the plot. It's never going to happen, you disgusting slime ball. And I will be turning up, Rowan. So be alert.